Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there, welcome back.
So this is picking up where we left off over on EEARTS, and we're going to be talking about the Issa Upanishad. But this is a little blurb I just wanted to share with you here, this one paragraph about the Upanishads. And it says, in the world there is no study so beautiful and so elevating as the Upanishads. It's been the solace of my life and will be the solace of my death. From the great 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, paying homage to the sublime ideas that have been animating the Hindu tradition for almost 3 millennia. It's actually much more than that. In the Upanishads, those majestic Himalayas of the soul, we discover the pan-Indian diagnosis of the human condition as trapped in a ceaseless round of death and rebirth, samsara, due to the consequences of actions, karma, performed in ignorance of the divine ground of all life, the infinite, the pure being, Brahman. We also hear the path and prescription, yoga, for liberation, moksha, from this confirming ignorance through each individual's realization of his or her inner spiritual nature, the universal self, the Atman or Purusha, which is none other than Brahman itself. The Sanskrit word Upanishad literally means setting down besides, referring to setting ignorance to the rest and revealing wisdom. Among the oldest sacred texts of Hinduism dating back to the 8th century BCE, this author believes the Upanishads are made up of the following books, and it lists them. So we are going to look at the shortest one first. And again, it's something that may or may not feel, I bet you it's going to feel more comfortable than most people realize if you haven't been exposed to it.
You know what this is going to add to the energy field? It's going to add the light of information. So even just listening to this, allow it to touch your soul, and it's going to put into action like the blooming of a flower. It's like being tapped with a wand. It's going to awaken parts of you, even if you don't understand it. Sit with it.
Okay, so instead of just reading the Issa, which I do have PDFs over here, I have multiple PDFs for you to look at. This one comes with a little translation, and so this is by Swami Paramananda. This particular Upanishad desires its title from the opening words Ishavaya, or God covered. The use of Isha, Issa, Lord, a more personal name of the Supreme Being than Brahman, Atman, or Self. The names usually found in the Upanishads constitutes one of its peculiarities. It forms the closing chapter of the Yajur Veda, known as Shukula, or white. So again, some of you might even have heard of or remember Jesus being referred to as Issa or Isha as well. Again, it's the oneness of the soul and God and the value of both faith and works as a means of ultimate attainment are the leading themes of this Upanishad. The general teaching of the Upanishads is that works alone, even the highest, can bring only temporal happiness and must inevitably bind a man unless through them he gains the knowledge of his real self. To help him acquire this knowledge is the aim of this and all Upanishads. Think about this too again. What do we hear in the Western churches all the time? You'll hear that debate. Is it works or is it faith? Right? And here you have it. It's pointing out, well, there's works, there's faith. The missing component in the West is self-realization. That understanding, well, who am I? That's the part that's missing in the West. There's no mention of self-realization in the West. We have the debate between two of the three things they're talking about here, but they're not debating the most important of them all.
Minor details, the why.
Yes, this is the missing ingredient. So we see peace chant, Om, that invisible absolute is whole. Whole is this. the visible phenomenal. From the invisible whole comes forth the visible whole. Through the visible whole has come from that invisible whole, yet the whole remains unaltered. Now, some of what comes out of like the Yoga Sutras and the Vedas and stuff can be mind spinning for a brain, a human brain, especially a human brain that's on time constraints. A human brain that is just thinking about the rent, the car payment, all these things. No, these guys that came to these realizations, when we talk about the rishis, when we talk about the yogis, the yoginis that come to these realizations of how the universe works, again, this was their entirety of their life, was dedicated to meditation and going deeply, deeply within. So it's so much harder, I think, for the Western mind to understand this. And you can only really reach your understanding through experience. Experience is something that comes through gnosis. And again, Gnosticism, gnosis, that experiential knowing, not that intellectual conceptualization saying, oh, I can get that concept. No, it's that I have experienced this. I know this. That's the whole difference. One of the reasons why this whole system that we're in is in place is to keep us from ever knowing this, from ever really knowing this, because we simply do not have the time to jump off that little wheel they have us on to take the time to come to the realization.
Mm-hmm. It's we really need to stay focused on the awakening and our experiences, and look to see what are we being blocked from. Look to see what is that thing that we are not allowed to do, says the construct. And understanding that these incorporations into the soul are so important. And I gotta pull in the subconscious aspect of everything. Subconscious is so powerful in this, and that's what I was kind of alluding to in the very beginning of this. Let this soak into your subconscious and guide you. This is really going to help you. If you are you're an old soul searching for the ultimate experience, this is for you.
Om, peace, 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 or Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. The indefinite term that is used in the Upanishads to designate the invisible absolute, because no word or name can fully define it. A finite object like a table or a tree can be defined, but God's source, who is indefinite and unbounded, cannot be expressed by finite language. Therefore, the rishis, or divine seers, desirous not to limit the unlimited, chose the indefinite term that to designate the absolute. So, Hari Om Tat Sat, that's basically saying that, I am the creator in a sense. And we all are. We're all part of that infinite ocean. In the light of true wisdom, the phenomenal and absolute are inseparable. All existence is in the absolute, and whatever exists must exist in it. Hence, all manifestation is merely a modification of the one supreme whole, and neither increases nor diminishes it. The whole, therefore, remains unaltered. All this, whatsoever exists in the universe, should be covered by the Lord, or again, covered by Brahman. Having renounced the unreal, enjoy the real. Do not covet the wealth of any man. So this is the first part of the Issa Upanishad right here. We cover all things with the Lord by perceiving the divine presence everywhere, in everything. When the consciousness is firmly fixed on God, the conception of diversity naturally drops away, because the one cosmic existence shines through all things. As we gain the light of wisdom, we cease to cling to the unrealities of this world, and we find all our joy in the realm of reality. The word enjoy is also interpreted by the great commentator Shankaracharya as protect, because the knowledge of our true self is the greatest protector and sustainer. If we do not have this knowledge, we cannot be happy, because nothing on this external plane of phenomena is permanent or dependable. He who is rich in the knowledge of the self does not covet external power or possession. If one should desire to live in this world 100 years, one should live performing karma, righteous deeds. Thus thou mightest live. There is no other way. By doing this karma, the fruits of the actions will not defile thee. If a man still clings to long life and earthly possessions, and is therefore unable to follow the path of self-knowledge, as prescribed in the first mantram text, then he may follow the path of right action. And, again, that's like karma yoga. Karma here means actions performed without a selfish motive, because they will bring, obviously, a better outcome, the tendency for a more abundant life. For the sake of the Lord alone, for when a man performs actions clinging blindly to his lower desires, then his actions bind him to the plane of ignorance or to the plane of birth and death. But when the same actions are performed with the surrender to God, they purify and liberate him. And again, we could see this in so many ways, being all about, again, what the law of one, and again, the law of one is not perfect. There's nothing that's perfect, because again, it was channeled through a vehicle. And every time we go through a vehicle, even when, the guides are going through Cindy, even though it's the guide speaking, not really Cindy speaking, they're still sending all the images and the signals through her brain. Same thing with the law of one. And thus there's that human component in it.
There is, that is, each one of us, we're very individual pieces of a lens, and that lens is put up to source. So of course, there's always going to be some distortion. There's supposed to be some distortion. That's very, very important. But doing things without wanting anything in return, and just doing things out of the pure goodness of your heart, that's where the path to this life is. And it is unfortunate. There's a lot of people that have a different motivation. But if you wonder, where should our motivations be? It should be helping one another, because that's our core source. That's what we're supposed to do. We came here to help one another. And there has been a lot of trauma, and we do have to work around that. And that's why I always say, when in doubt, be kind, because you just don't know what someone has been through. Even if somebody gets angry at you, even if somebody yells at you, a yogi or a guru would never, ever get upset at that person, because they simply know the universe. They understand the distortions of human nature. And then karma will do whatever it needs to do from there. But always be kind.
After leaving their bodies, they who have killed this self go to the worlds of the asuras, covered with blinding ignorance. The idea of rising to bright regions as the reward for well-doers, and the falling into realms of darkness as a punishment for evildoers, is common to all great religions. But Vedanta claims that the condition of heaven and hell is only temporary, because our actions, being finite, can only produce a finite result. What does it mean to kill the self? How can the immortal soul ever be destroyed? It cannot be destroyed. It can only be obscured. Those who hold themselves under the sway of ignorance, who serve the flesh and neglect the Atman, or the real self, are not able to perceive the effulgent and indestructible nature of their soul. Hence, they fall into the realm where the soul light does not shine. Here, the Upanishads show that the only hell is the absence of knowledge. As long as man is overpowered by the darkness of ignorance, he is the slave of nature and must accept whatever comes as the fruit of his thoughts and deeds. When he strays into the path of unreality, the sages declare that he destroys himself, because he who clings to the perishable body and regards it as his true self must experience death many times. That one, though motionless, is swifter than the mind. The senses can never overtake it, for it ever goes before. Though immovable, it travels faster than those who run. By it, the all-pervading air sustains all living beings. This verse explains the character of the Atman, or the Self. A finite object can be taken from one place, put in another, but it can only occupy one space at a time. The Atman, however, is present everywhere. Hence, though one may run with the greatest swiftness to overtake it, it already is there before him. The all-pervading air must be supported by this self, since it is infinite, and as nothing can live without breathing air, all living things must draw their life from the cosmic self.
Mm-hmm. You know, a couple things are flashing in my mind that I think would help people, that needs to be spoken. Have you ever been in a situation where you've had like a lot of bad things happen to you, or you perceive them to be bad, and they really ache your soul, they hurt your soul? And I want you to picture a vase, and inside of every vase there is a light. There is a light of the all. And every time there is a crack in this vase, understand that the light is going to shine through it. So those beings who have gone through really difficult times and had difficult things happen to them, they are going to really shine bright, because there's many cracks in that vase. And isn't that a beautiful thing?
It moves and it moves not. It is far and also it is near. It is within, it is also without all this. It is near to those who have the power to understand it, for it dwells in the heart of everyone. But it seems far to those whose mind is covered by the clouds of sensuality and self-delusion. It is within, because it is the innermost soul of all creatures. And it is without as the essence of the whole external universe, infilling it like the all-pervading ether.
This is something that you can sit with, and I do not believe that it's bad to come here and experience things, experience 3D pleasures, the sensuality of things, you know, but that's me. But if you are someone who's come here for that spiritual growth, that expansion, you'll know, you will feel it in your heart, and you go with that, you roll with that. Do not feel angry or sad about yourself for experiencing pleasures, because that's what we came here for.
He who sees all beings in the self, and the self in all beings, he never turns away from it, the self.
Are we not all one, and looking at one another, having these experiences, helping each other up when we fall down? And there's one thing that I really like to use as an analogy. We are all just children holding hands, walking each other home from school. Keep that in mind.
He who perceives all beings as the self, for him, how can there be delusion or grief when he sees this oneness everywhere? He who perceives the self everywhere never shrinks from anything, because through his higher consciousness he feels united with all life. When a man sees God in all beings, and all beings in God, and also God dwelling in his own soul, how can he hate any other living thing? Grief and delusion rest upon a belief in diversity, which leads to competition and to all forms of selfishness. With the realization of oneness, this sense of diversity vanishes, and the cause of misery is removed.
looking at one another and understanding that we are all coming from the same place. So when you see your fellow man go through hardships or go through things that are good, understand that that's you. You are that. There is no reason for any kind of jealousy in any way, shape, or form. We are all one. We are all in this together, having our separate experience, and that should be celebrated. That should be honored every chance we get. I think jealousy is one of the worst emotions that we could have. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of trauma, and there are people who have that emotion, but I think that's the one thing that gets in the way of so many things that are good. So if you see someone who has, a really nice house and they have nice things, understand that's you too. That is you too. You are doing that as well. No reason to ever look at anyone having an experience and being sad about that, because it all comes back to one.
Yeah, we choose often to take lives that are different from the previous in many ways to experience new things. And, that's all part of the learning. He, the self, is all-encircling, resplendent, bodiless, spotless, without sinews, pure, untouched by sin, all-seeing, all-knowing, transcendent, self-existent. He has disposed all things duly for eternal years. This text defines the real nature of the self. When our mind is cleansed from the dross of matter, then alone can we behold the vast, radiant, subtle, ever pure and spotless self, the true basis of our existence.
I have to look at this, and when it does talk about being cleansed from the dross of matter, this pulls me to nature. Nature does not rely on anything in the external to be. Birds are always fed. Butterflies, they go through a cocoon, they come out, and they are beautiful. They do not need to be told that they are beautiful. They just are. And flowers, same thing. They don't look at each other thinking, well, Marcy turned out better than me. No, that's not. They be and they are. And that's where I think a lot of problems come in, is we are human doings and not human beings. We need to be more.
They enter into blind darkness who worship avidya, which is ignorance and delusion. They fall, as it were, into greater darkness who worship vidya, which is knowledge. By vidya, one end is attained, by advidya, another. Thus we have heard from the wise men who taught this. He who knows at the same time both vidya and avidya crosses over the death by avidya and attains immortality through vidya. And this is, again, one of those that can send your mind spinning in a way. But again, this is all part of, well, we know that science is always changing, and there's purposes behind the science. And again, all that we need to really do is to refine our senses. And when we refine our senses to a certain point, we can go beyond the senses and then achieve that true state of knowing. So those who follow or worship the path of selfishness and pleasure without knowing anything higher necessarily fall into darkness. But those who worship or cherish knowledge for mere intellectual pride and satisfaction fall into greater darkness, because the opportunity which they misuse is greater. In the subsequent verses, vidya and avidya are used in something the same sense as faith and works in the Christian Bible. Neither alone can lead to the ultimate goal, but when taken together, they carry one to the highest. Work done with unselfish motive purifies the mind and enables man to perceive his undying nature. From this he gains inevitably a knowledge of God, because the soul and God are one and inseparable, and when he knows himself to be one with the supreme and indestructible whole, he realizes his immortality. And again, we can, we could study everything that there is out there, everything. And if we don't have a realization of ourselves, it's all for naught.
You know, and this is just an opportunity that I want to throw out there because I'm dyslexic, and it's extremely difficult for me to read and absorb because I'm struggling so hard with the reading. I've done a lot of memorizations just to get me past the basic points of life, and sometimes when I read stuff, I'll miss whole blocks of information. I mean, whole words. And what has that done for me, and what does that do for someone who might be dyslexic like me? That forces us to go within. It's like we have to rely on that within, which is a very, very scary thing, because when you've made mistakes in life, then you tend to question that inner self. You question that going within, and you want to be able to read and follow directions of life, but you can't. So please understand that dyslexia, that is a blessing. That's a huge blessing. And thank God, though, I have Mike by my side, because I wouldn't be able to explore this to the depths that I can without him. So we are being pulled together like glue, I feel, to help bring this information in both ways to you guys, so that you guys can follow this as well. It's a true blessing. So many mental illnesses are not mental illnesses. They are a different way of being, and we've just had them put in front of us in a way that says, well, this is a disability, when in reality, when you understand the disabilities, you realize for what they are, the abilities that they are for. So never look at yourself as wrong or broken. Let's go back to that that perspective lens that's being put in front of source. And as long as you're following your heart and that which is good, you cannot go wrong. You can't.
Absolutely. My own way of doing things has changed a ton since I started these channels. A ton. I can't overstate that. Now, when I'm faced with big questions, or how to do something, more than ever, instead of going to a book or a YouTube video, I'll sit still. I'll do the mantras, and sometimes it doesn't take even mantras. It just takes sitting still, focusing on the crown. And, I guess the clearest way to represent it is like Neo in the Matrix. It's like, hey, I need a download to, operate a helicopter. Well, no, I need a download to understand something. And what I'll do is I'll sit there, I'll feel the energy coming down through the crown chakra. And, again, it feels almost like breathing in cool air through your nose. It's almost kind of that same feeling. At times it can be even more powerful, more sensual, and more palpable than even a cold, deep inhalation on a winter's night. That's how strong this feels coming in. And I get a download, and instantly I know. And I forget what it was we were talking about. We were talking about something, and I said to Cindy, my grandfather says we should do it this way. And that was not the old me. I didn't have that type of connection pre-Life with Cindy and pre-dedication to daily double or triple mantra and meditation sessions. I didn't have that connection, but now I do, where I could literally tap into, one grandfather was a mechanic engineer and the other one was a farmer. And so it's just a matter of tapping into whatever guide you need, and pulling that information out from the ether. We can all do this. And you don't even necessarily, there's no logical thought process involved. No, it's not the brain. It's a download. All of a sudden, there's just this huge, I know, aha. And it's not even like a connecting the dots aha. It's an immediate knowing. And it's so cool.
in the golden age, all of this information is able to lie within our energy field, so we don't need books. In this age, yes, the books I find are useful because then at least we have something to filter through us and learn to feel that thing. Is that true or is that not true? And I think that's the challenge so many times, is we are all looking for truth. There are people who find a lot of comfort in books, and they find a lot of comfort in, listening to someone else. And there is nothing wrong with that. We have to try on every garment and see what feels best for us. Ultimately, you do end up pretty much making your own. But don't be afraid to try things on. But at the same time, when you're going through book studies, don't use that as your cloak. Don't use that as your whoopee. Don't use that as your blanket. Because you are here to discover you. And that's the most beautiful part of all of this, is these writings do help you discover who you are, and they do give you a guide map, and there's nothing wrong with that either.
I would share that when we say things like, I think that, it is probably inferior to, in many cases, I feel that, and that is still inferior to I know. And, we shall move on. They fall into blind darkness who worship the unmanifested, and they fall into greater darkness who worship the manifested. By the worship of the unmanifested, one end is attained. By the worship of the manifested, another. Thus we have heard from the wise men who taught this. He who knows at the same time both the unmanifested, the cause of manifestation, and the destructible or manifested, he crosses over death through the knowledge of the destructible, and attains immortality through the knowledge of the first cause, unmanifested. This particular Upanishad deals chiefly with the invisible cause and the visible manifestation. And the whole trend of its teaching is to show that they are one and the same, one being the outcome, the other hence. No perfect knowledge is possible without the simultaneous comprehension of both. The wise men declare that he who worships in a one-sided way, whether visible or invisible, does not reach the highest goal. Only he who has coordinated understanding of both the visible and the invisible, of matter and spirit, of inactivity and that which is behind activity, conquers nature and thus overcomes death. By work, by making the mind steady, and by following the prescribed rules given in the scriptures, a man gains wisdom. By the light of that wisdom, he is able to perceive the invisible cause in all visible forms. Therefore, the wise man sees him in every manifested form. They who have a true conception of God are never separated from him. They exist in him, and he in them.
Everything is in constant movement. There's nothing on this planet that remains the same. You have to see things and understand everything is potential. It's all out there, and that's a lot to take in. But when we look at information from a higher perspective and understand that things are in constant movement and not just adapt this one solidified entity, we get stuck. We want to be able to see things in movement as much as possible and understand that all of these dualities come together and we absorb it as a duality.
The face of truth is hidden by a golden disk. O Pushan, effulgent being, uncover thy face that I, the worshipper of truth, may behold thee. O Pushan, O sun, sole traveler of the heavens, controller of all, son of Prajapati, withdraw thy rays and gather up thy burning effulgence. Now through thy grace I behold thy blessed and glorious form. The Purusha, the effulgent being who dwells within thee, I am he. Here the sun, who is the giver of all light, is used as the symbol of the infinite, the giver of all wisdom. The seeker after truth prays to the effulgent one to control his dazzling rays, that his eyes, no longer blinded by them, may behold the truth. Having perceived it, he proclaims, "Now I see that the effulgent being and I are one and the same, and my delusion is destroyed. By the light of truth, he is able to discriminate between the real and the unreal, and the knowledge thus gained convinces him that he is one with the Supreme, and there is no difference between himself and the Supreme, or as Christ said, I and my Father are one."
You know, at some point I am going to sit down and really unpack the information that I got when I got to view Source. I saw Source. I was shown Source. I felt Source. And it was so extremely overwhelming. I still have not unpacked it, but I really want to, because I want to share and express that experience really to a very deep depth, and share it with other people, and understanding that the sun is source, sun gazing, source gazing. You know, it's even as simple as the sun is plasma, we are plasma. There is no difference. There's no difference, with the exception of we can keep going back to this little perceptive tool that the sun is, the sun is shining through that perception, and then that's us. But we are all one and the same. We are source. So important to get that.
May my life breath go to the all-pervading and immortal prana, and let this body be burned to ashes. Om, O mind, remember thy deeds. Om, O mind, remember thy deeds. Remember, seek not fleeting results as the reward of thy actions. O mind, strive for the imperishable. This mantram or text is often chanted at the hour of death to remind one of the perishable nature of the body and the eternal nature of the soul. When the clear vision of the distinction between the mortal body and the immortal soul dawns in the heart, then all craving for physical pleasure or material possession drops away, and one can say, "Let the body be burned to ashes, that the soul may attain its freedom." For death is nothing more than the casting off of a worn-out garment.
Mm-hmm. You reach that point of understanding, and you know that your soul, you don't die. You do not die. You always are. And I think many people, when they look at the word death or dying, they think that they're going to disappear. They're going to blow out like a candle. And that's just not true. You are always going to be you. Do not be afraid to go to the next stages, but at the same time, we are here to walk this journey, no matter how painful, no matter how many disappointments, no matter how many things that really seem to be getting in our way. These are all blessings to allow us to understand ourselves and know ourselves. Let our emotions express themselves. Bring your self-expansion, because you take all of that with you. All of your emotions, all of your experiences comes within this little orb, this little spark of source. You get to keep all that. We are all gods in training, and we all have a kingdom. All of us. We all have certain things in our lives that we are in charge of, and we kind of dictate that, and we say where things go, and we're going through these experiences one by one by one, and we get to keep all that. All that stays with us. That does not die.
O Agni, bright being, lead us to blessedness by the good path, O Lord. Thou knowest all our deeds. Remove all evil and delusion from us. To thee we offer our prostrations and supplications again and again. And there ends the Upanishad. This Upanishad is called the Isa-Vajja Upanishad, which gives Brahma Vidya, or the knowledge of all-pervading deity. The dominant thought running through it is that we cannot enjoy life or realize true happiness unless we consciously cover all with the omnipresent Lord. If we are not fully consciousness of that which sustains our life, how can we live wisely and perform our duties? Whatever we see, movable or immovable, good or bad, is all that. We must not divide our conception of the universe, for in dividing it we have only fragmentary knowledge, and thus we limit ourselves. He who sees all beings in his self and his self in all beings never suffers, because when he sees all creatures within his true self, then jealousy, grief, and hatred vanish. He alone can love. that awe-pervading one is self-effulgent, birthless, deathless, pure, untainted by sin and sorrow. Knowing this, he becomes free of the bondage of matter and transcends death. Transcending death means realizing the difference between the body and the soul and identifying oneself with the soul. When we actually behold the undecaying soul within us and realize our true nature, we no longer identify with the body which dies, and we do not die with the body. Self-knowledge has always been the theme of the sages, and the Upanishads deal especially with the knowledge of the self and also with the knowledge of God, because there's no difference between the self and God. They are one and the same. That which comes out of the infinite whole must also be infinite, hence the self is infinite. That is the ocean. We are the drops, so long as a drop remains separate from the ocean, small and weak, but when it is one with the ocean and it has the strength of the ocean. Similarly, as long as man believes himself to be separate from the whole, he is helpless. But when he identifies himself with it, then he transcends all weakness and partakes of its omnipotent qualities. And thus, this is why, this is so valuable, because again, this gives us the knowledge of the true self. That is the part that's missing. That is the biggest point, and it is the part that's missing over in the Abrahamic tradition.
Mm-hmm. And take this in small little bits or not, but at least give yourself the opportunity to understand the vast expansion that this life has to offer. And once we bring all of this information and we take it home and we put it in the ocean of consciousness, there's a lot there. There's a lot of life. There's a lot of living. There's a lot of understanding. There's a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge, and everything ultimately is good, even if it hurts sometimes.
And we thank you guys for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. To make an appointment, it's for the moment evolutionaryenergyarts at Gmail, but we're going to have a new email update that we will be giving you guys. And as always, much love, God bless, and namaste.
Namaste.